Hi everyone, this is Nicole Sanchez from MAPC. So we're going to be presenting this webinar with Meister Consultant Group, and Jeremy Koo from Meister will be presenting on some of the other programs in the broader solar thermal program that's going on right now. So we're the regional planning agency, and we work with 101 cities and towns in the greater Boston area. And our clean energy team is working on the solar thermal challenge with Meister and MassCEC. And these are some of the other things that we work on as well. And so for this project, this is the team with MAPC and Meister. So we're all working on this on a pilot procurement project for municipalities for solar thermal, and there are other programs that Meister is working on as well with the Hampshire Council of Governments. So today we'll go over the broader program with MassCEC, the Solar Hot Water Outreach Program, different incentives for solar thermal. Meister will give us an update on their program with the Hampshire Council of Governments, and we'll go over how solar thermal systems work and in a little bit more detail about the pilot program with municipal solar procurement. So this is what the broader program looks like. So there are a couple of different branches of pilot programs going on at the same time. And so the Center for Ecotechnology is running one branch of the program that's working on community outreach and technical assistance. Then the Center for Sustainable Technology is working on solar thermal case studies to go along with the programs. And then Meister is working on two projects, one with MAPC, which is the municipal procurement pilot, and one with the Hampshire Council of Governments, which is more of a solarized style program for residents interested in going solar thermal, and that's with Amherst, Williamsburg, and Pelham. So we're working on a project that's really focused on municipalities that are interested in installing solar thermal on municipal buildings, and we're focusing on the different procurement strategies that we can use, and we're looking to make strategies and create templates ultimately that can be used by other municipalities after this program. And the installations that we're looking at are both small scale and commercial scale. And then for the Hampshire Council of Governments, they're looking at for this pilot project, installations that are really on the smaller scale for residents, and they're a good candidate for that pilot program because a lot of residential homes in the area currently use oil for heat, and so we have a lot more residences with natural gas or electric. So we have a lot of these programs going on right now because we have some really good incentives for solar thermal, and we want to see different ways that municipalities and residents can start to use some of these incentives. So with MassCEC, there's two rebates. There are a rebate specifically for the feasibility studies, and so that goes up to $5,000 and has a 5% cost share, and then there's an installation rebate, and that's based on this formula that depends on the number of collectors and the efficiency of them, and there's a slightly different calculation for nonprofit and public entities than regular commercial entities. And I'm going to switch over to Jeremy so that he can talk about the project with the Hampshire Council of Governments.
how we entered into this project with MAPC, and give you some updates on what's going on in Western Mass.
Jeremy, you missed the first part of that, sorry, because we forgot to unmute you right away.
Oh, gotcha. Hi, I'm Jeremy Koo. I'm an associate with the Cabinets Group, formerly of Meister Consultants Group. I've been asked to just give a little bit more background about how we got started with this project with MAPC, and also to give some updates from what's going on in Western Mass. And just as sort of as a framing point, I think I'm sure many folks who are on the line are aware of the state's greenhouse gas emissions goals, or may have similar goals within their communities. Thermal energy accounts for at least 30% of emissions in Mass, and getting to where we need to for our 80 by 50 goals will require, I think, a combination of activities that will also include, I think, will require a transition towards, from fossil fuels towards renewable heating and cooling technologies. Some of these technologies, in particular air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, solar thermal, modern wood heating, and other forms of bioenergy were laid out in the 2014 Commonwealth Accelerated Renewable Thermal Strategy, which has been sort of a framing for some of the actions that the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center and the Department of Energy Resources have taken over the last 3 or 4 years in pursuit of moving this forward. So I guess the question, why solar thermal? It's a bit of I guess it's taken a bit of a backseat in recent years to the explosion in the solar photovoltaics or PV markets. But the reality is that water heating is still about 20% or more of the average household's heating energy usage. And certainly, I think, as you'll hear more from Nicole and MAPC later on this webinar, there are plenty of types of commercial buildings, nonprofit buildings, and government buildings that may also have sufficient hot water loads where hot water heating ends up being a significant proportion of their energy usage. So solar thermal is something that can help to displace a majority of the fossil fuels and associated emissions related to hot water usage. We often will use the term synonymously with solar hot water, which is the most common and mature application of solar thermal technology and has the most incentive support within the state. That said, there are other solar thermal technologies, solar air heating and such, that are available on the market, but our project is focused primarily on solar hot water. But we may see some emergence of other solar thermal applications now that they're being supported by the state's alternative portfolio standard. Just to give a sense of what that entails, I think when you look at comparison to fossil fuel heating fuels with some of the other renewable heating and cooling technologies, I think solar thermal has the benefit of being one of the few technologies that is largely emissions-free for all of the heating energy that it displaces outright, because you're getting things directly heated by the sun. But certainly, there's a wide range of different renewable heating and cooling technologies, and certainly the state is sort of taking an all-of-the-above approach at the moment, just because we are a little bit further behind, I think, on the renewable thermal market relative to the renewable electricity market. Nicole briefly touched on this. MassCEC released something called the Solar Thermal Challenge earlier last year as part of their Commonwealth Solar Hot Water Program, which funds the incentive that Nicole mentioned through 2020. And their goals are really to focus on growing the market around solar thermal, to see if we can sort of get some of the same market growth we've seen on the solar PV side, increase awareness of solar thermal, since, as I mentioned, when you say solar, most people are thinking about electricity generation and not hot water or thermal energy. And also to think about, what options are available through, community or, other interventions and strategies to reduce some of the costs associated, as, we've seen that solar thermal has similarly also not seen the significant drop-off in cost that solar PV has seen over the last 10 to 15 years. So As Nicole mentioned, we're sort of hitting it from all sides with these 3 different teams here. We are working on the residential and the municipal side, and with MAPC, Hampshire Council of Governments, and also the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission, which is a third partner on this project. While the Center for Ecotechnology focuses on sort of stimulating the commercial market, and a combination of the Center for Sustainable Energy and New Ecology will be trying to move the ball forward on the multifamily side. So our project, so I think there are 2 pieces to our project. I think one piece that involves all 3 of the regional planning agencies and council of governments is sort of this notion of increasing the deployment of residential solar thermal through a community group purchasing model that is similar to the solarized mass model that has been pretty successful in driving, I think, over 2,000 solar PV installations since 2011 across the state. The idea is that I think with solar thermal there is I think our understanding is there's less awareness of it in the market, and there are fewer installers that are active in the market right now compared to the growth we're seeing in the PV industry. So our goal is to implement this program across region-wide territories. So for Hampshire Council of Governments, who is leading the first of these campaigns, this will span all 4 counties in Western Mass, and with certain specific communities that will be leading grassroots outreach efforts within their municipalities to really amplify some of the outreach that's going on across the region. Similarly, MAPC's working on a solar thermal procurement vehicle for municipal facilities, which I'll let them touch on later on in this presentation. We are hoping to eventually run campaigns in each of the 3 territories of our regional community partners. MassCEC asked us to start with a single pilot, and we opted to select Hampshire Council of Governments just because of a number of factors that were identified when we did a bit of a market analysis of the municipalities in each region. Particularly, we found that the low share of gas heating and also expected access to gas in a lot of communities in Western Mass is pretty low, which increases the favorable economics around solar hot water. There's a higher share of single-family owner-occupied homes who are more likely to be adopters. Because of there are a fewer number of municipal lighting plants in Western Mass that don't pay into the Renewable Energy Trust. Most residents in Western Mass are eligible for MassCEC's incentives and MassA's financing programs. And also, I believe 25 communities in Western Mass have completed solarized mass campaigns, which suggested there was sort of some grassroots enthusiasm that we could draw from to make our first pilot a success so that we could then bring it to Eastern Mass. So far, we're in the middle of the procurement process. Our goal is to launch what has now been dubbed the Western Mass Solar Hot Water Challenge by the end of next month. Again, it's based on the solarized model, but is regionalized. We held a couple of workshops at the end of last year to get more interest from municipalities within Western Mass, and we have so far Amherst, Pelham, and Williamsburg have sort of committed to being these community champions to support the selection process and really provide focused outreach within their communities. And there are other towns that attended those workshops, like Ashfield and Granby and such, that may also provide support later on in the process. We also recruited support from the UMass Clean Energy Extension, who will also be helping us with the installer selection process. So we released the RFP in December, and our bids are due next week. So hopefully on our next webinar, we'll have a little bit more updates to provide you here on the status of the campaign. It's also asked to just give a quick overview of what we're talking about technology-wise. Solar, again, we're not talking about solar photovoltaics, solar PV, which has gotten, I think a lot of attention, a lot of policy support in recent years. We're talking about solar thermal, which really uses direct solar energy to provide thermal energy to a household, in this case for hot water. Usually for a good site, a solar hot water system can offset about 60 to 70% of the home's annual hot water demand. As as you might expect, there's a significant drop-off in the winter associated with energy generation. Typically, a lot of systems are what are called there are a lot of different configurations of solar hot water systems, but in general, there's a collector that is used to absorb the thermal energy, which heats an antifreeze fluid within the system, which is then transferred to a hot water tank through a heat exchanger and then provided to the rest of the home. Usually there's some backup heating that's needed. That can either be, you can either tie the storage tank into an existing hot water heater, or there are some backup tanks that have an electric resistance coil built into them. This is typically the setup for any sort of small-scale system, whether it's a residential system or a small commercial or small municipal system. It tends to be more dependent on the thermal energy demand of the building, and so certainly when you see large multifamily systems, you may see arrays of 20 or more collectors, whereas most residential and small scale applications are going to be around 2 to 4 collectors. And there are also two types of collectors: flat plates and evacuated tubes. Certainly not, I'm not going to take a side on which is more appropriate, since there has been pretty robust debate around which technology may be more suitable that has been occurring over the last few decades. I will say that about 90% of the systems, small-scale systems at least, that are installed through MassCEC's program are flat plates. They tend to be a little bit cheaper to install, and because they're insulated but still release a little bit of heat, they tend to melt their snow quickly, which help clear your roof a little bit more quickly near the end of the winter. Evacuated tubes, while they have a slightly lower market share in Massachusetts, they do account for most systems that are installed overseas. They tend to do a little bit better in colder temperatures, or when just because the tubes themselves are vacuums, and so the temperature difference between the outdoor air and the antifreeze fluid that's being heated tends to be maintained better. And also evacuated tubes can work well for process heating applications where you need higher temperature heat. I'll pause there and turn things back over to MAPC to talk a little bit more about their municipal procurement pilot, but we'll stick around to answer any questions as well on things that I presented on earlier in this webinar.
Thank you, Jeremy. And I just want to remind everyone that we will have a question and answer portion at the end of this webinar, and if you have questions at any point during the webinar, just type them into the comments section on the sidebar, and we'll answer them towards the end. And if you have questions after the webinar, we'll also put contact info to ask questions as they come up later. So this slide gives us an overview of of the pilot project that we're working on with the MAPC communities. So this is just the process that we're going through. So we started out by doing market research on different solar thermal vendors and research on different types of solar thermal systems. And we turned that, then after that step, we did some outreach to our different communities to see which municipalities would be interested in participating, and and municipalities that had buildings that would be good fits for solar thermal. And so after that, we've put together a request for quotes for feasibility studies, and so we worked with Chelsea and Winthrop with 3 different sites for the feasibility study procurement, and we recently selected RES Solar as the awarded vendor for the feasibility studies. So those studies are in process right now. And then our next steps after this part of the project is to do another procurement and invitation for bids for solar thermal installations with Chelsea, Winthrop, and Concord, and to select that vendor. And then we'll be providing ongoing technical support and support for contracting and installation for those communities, and then looking to bring the tools that we gain from this pilot to our other communities so that we can replicate this process again. And so part of the market research that we did, we looked at what different solar thermal systems looked like, and this chart shows the different SRCC ratings for different solar thermal collectors. And so you can see the difference in efficiency between the evacuated tube collectors and the flat plate collectors. There's a trade-off between efficiency and price, but the SRCC rating measures the kilobTUs generated per day per collector, so it gives a good measure of efficiency. There isn't really a direct equivalent of the watts per panel in PV in solar thermal, but this is a way to look at what a system would produce for solar thermal. And then this is what we looked at for the different costs of different systems. So we're seeing how the price changes on average with different amounts of collectors. And so for siting a solar thermal system, we're looking at very similar things for feasibility as we are for solar photovoltaic systems overall. We're looking for a sunny roof. We're looking for a south-facing roof with the right orientation, that there is some wiggle room within the solar window. The differences between what we're looking for solar thermal and solar PV is that we actually need less roof area most of the time. And this means that we can look at roofs that might not be applicable for solar photovoltaic if they don't have enough space on the roof, or if the roof support is close to but not quite at the level that they need for, especially for a flat roof for PV, because we're using less of the roof and we can be strategic about where we place the collectors. And then something else to keep in mind is that it's a little bit easier to re-roof around a solar hot water system because they're installed up from the roof with more space between the roof and the system than photovoltaic panels. So for PV, you're usually looking to uninstall the entire system and then reinstall the system. And for this, if your roof age is going to reach the end of the roof life during the lifetime of the system, you have less of a cost-intensive process to re-roof. So just a couple things to keep in mind if you're thinking about, is this building good for solar thermal? And so other things we're looking for determining whether a building is good for solar thermal are, we're looking for buildings that were a high hot water use. We're looking for buildings that have a consistent, more or less, hot water needs throughout the day. And then in a perfect world, we're looking for a building that has a hot water use that's pretty consistent year-round. But realistically, we're looking for buildings that have some hot water use year-round, and we know that there are going to be seasonal variations. And so what that's meant for us, for good candidates for municipal buildings, are buildings with a gym or showers, a rec center with a pool, ice skating rinks, because they have showers and Zamboni uses, school buildings with pools or gyms, and police and fire stations, because they have more often than not a 24/7 use and sometimes have showers. So then here's some examples of what this use profile could look like for different types of buildings. So this has natural gas instead of electric heat, and we can see that there's some variation in the water usage throughout the year, but there's still some usage in the summer. This is a school with a swimming pool, and so there's usage throughout the year. It's a little bit more consistent, and there's this has a pretty high electric heat usage. And then this is a police station with showers, so we still have some use in the summer in here. It's a little bit more consistent with the water throughout the year. So for the actual feasibility study procurement, we were looking at 3 buildings. We were looking at an ice rink in Winthrop, a fire station in Chelsea, and a police department in Chelsea. So we'll be getting the final feasibility studies back soon, and we'll be moving on to the next procurement. But you can see that the roofs are pretty, if the bottom of the page is south-facing, so there are flat roofs and there are roofs that are facing south. But there's a lot of different building use types that can fit for this system. And this is a list of what to expect from the feasibility study itself and what to make sure that you're putting in the procurement. So this is what to prep your facilities managers for if you're going to be doing a feasibility study. So if you have multiple buildings that you're thinking about, then you want to expect preliminary walkthrough of different buildings to see what the roofs look like, which way they're facing, what the interior of the buildings look like, and that is could take about a half a day if you're walking through a bunch of different sites, but doesn't really take too long in each individual building. Then if you're doing a longer feasibility study for a particular building, then you want to expect a few hours on site to measure roof supports, install water metering, assess what equipment's already there, and measure the space for the storage tank, to look at the roof quality and the roof age and measure how much sunlight is actually going to be in that location, so where the collectors should be placed. And then you want to see the flow meter testing for 1 week on site to get the data collection, and then an analysis using one of these energy models. You also want to expect an economic model that includes the incentives that are applicable to you, and you ideally want to see vendors that know how to apply for the MassCEC rebates and that are willing to apply for the feasibility study rebate for you. And so the next steps for our project this month, we're working on the development of the invitation for bids for installation, and then in about a month we expect to be selecting an installation vendor and running the procurement, and then after that we'll be doing more outreach to other municipalities and another webinar to talk about procurement templates for feasibility studies and installation, and doing some continuing support with the communities that we're already working with. So if you have any questions, just type them into the comment section. So we have a few questions. So the first one is, will municipal procurements be for only renewable thermal, or might they be combined with other energy efficiency or renewable energy measures? So the procurements that we're doing as part of the pilot project are focused on solar thermal, but the techniques and the templates that we're going to be putting together will help create procurements that can be for a mix of measures, but we're focusing on what municipalities need to include for qualifications for solar thermal, for feasibility studies, and for installation.
Nicole, can I just jump in with an addition? Hi, everybody. I'm Kimmy Peterson, the Director of Clean Energy with MAPC. Thanks for joining us today. Just wanted to add that Nicole has it exactly right, but that we also do put together procurements on a number of other technologies that we currently have going now, and we're always looking for kind of interesting things to help communities do collective procurements for or individual procurements for going forward. So I would encourage you to check out our website. Feel free to follow us as a department, as an agency after this webinar. And yeah, we're happy to discuss what other technologies you might be looking to procure as a community. Thanks, Nicole.
Yeah. I think, do we have yeah, in the chat. Okay. So we have, this question is, what is the purpose of the feasibility study? Is it to tell you which buildings would be eligible for the pilot? So we're doing 2 procurements. So we've already done one of them, and the purpose of the feasibility study is for installation. So we had communities that were interested in installing solar thermal who still needed to do the feasibility study, and some communities that had already done feasibility studies on their own. So the first procurement we just did for the feasibility study itself so that we could have feasibility studies from all the communities before the second procurement.
And the feasibility studies were required in order to receive the funding from MassCEC going forward, too. So
yeah.
That allowed us to tap into the incentives going into the future.
Yeah.
At their own expense, but for municipalities and nonprofits. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, we missed the first part of.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to add that the feasibility studies are recommended for any sort of larger scale systems with commercial or for-profit entities. They would have to pay for those feasibility studies, but MassCEC provides an incentive that covers the cost of the feasibility study for nonprofits and municipal and government buildings. So why not do so and get sort of a better sense of what how feasible the site is before issuing an RFP if it's paid for through incentives. Typically we don't see it used at feasibility studies completed for smaller scale systems, definitely not on the residential side. But take advantage of the incentive when it's there.
Okay. And I don't think we have any more questions at the moment, so I do have a slide with just some resources and links. So the first couple of these are for the guides to the MassCEC programs and the 2 rebates and how to apply And then there are also some resources on here for residents and what they can expect with solar thermal systems. And then I've also put on here the MAPC Solar Thermal Installation Resources Guide, and that's a good resource if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of how solar thermal systems work and what the different technologies look like in practice. So if you have questions after this webinar, feel free to give me an email or a call with them, and we'll get back to you. And I'll also be sending the slides out to everyone after today, so you'll be able to access the resources or look back at the slides if you need them. And I'm also going to be sending out the recording for today's webinar, so you'll be able to hear the audio that goes with the slides as well. So thank you for joining us today.